Good afternoon. I'm John Horwich, the President and CEO of Easterseals DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and I'm so pleased to have you with us today. At Easterseals, our vision is to create a hopeful, inclusive community where all people realize their potential and live meaningful lives. When we talk about an inclusive community, that really means everyone: people with disabilities, military families, low-income and historically marginalized communities. So I'm very excited about today's webinar that is at the intersection of so many of these issues, and grateful to our close collaborators at Partners in Promise for shining the light on their importance and the difficulties families often have accessing services. Replays of today's session, as well as logins for future sessions, can always be seen on our website, candidconversations.eseal.org. I'm pleased to introduce now our moderator, Michelle Norman, the Executive Director and founder of Partners in Promise, a nonprofit organization focused on protecting the rights of military children in special education. Michelle is a Navy spouse and mother of an 18-year-old daughter with cerebral palsy and other disabilities. Michelle has turned her own experience into passionate advocacy for military children with disabilities and their families. Among other honors, the Military Officers Association of America recognized her work with their Changemaker Award. Michelle?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, John, for the kind introduction. I am incredibly thankful for our partnership with Easterseals DC, Maryland, Virginia, and this opportunity to bring leaders, key stakeholders, and military families together to discuss military special education. As John mentioned, Partners in Promise is focused on sharing the stories of exceptional military families while educating and advising leaders on the education challenges our families face. We're a team of military spouses with diverse backgrounds to include special education advocates, attorneys, educators, researchers, just to name a few. It's through storytelling and statistically significant data that help us identify top-down solutions. And that is what we're going to be doing today. We're excited to deep dive into our annual survey findings. Our survey, in collaboration with The Ohio State University, was fielded last October and led by our Chief Operating Officer and lead researcher, Jennifer Barnhill. Jennifer has been focused on military family advocacy for over 15 years. Her previous survey research with Partners in Promise has been cited and utilized by industry leaders in both military and civilian communities, to include the White House, Blue Star Families, and more. She's also the driving force behind our storytelling, where her vast experience as a published military family writer and reporter enables us to explain a very complex subject like special education. For this survey, Jennifer led a research team of 5 professionals through the design of the survey, data analysis, and final reporting. So today, our team will discuss several major takeaways from the survey and how this highly mobile lifestyle impacts children with special needs and their education. We'll examine those challenges and discuss recommendations for the way forward. We're also thrilled to have several special guests with us that will share their stories, their resources, and provide their expertise during the Q&A session, so please include your questions in the chat. Additionally, I would also like to thank our wonderful sponsors, PCS Grades and CareStarter, whose support for our annual survey made all of this possible. Now, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Mrs. Shireen Brown, who's joining us today to share her family's story. Mrs. Brown is the spouse of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Charles C.Q. Brown, and a passionate military families advocate. She leads an initiative called 5 and Thrive, in which she provides guidance in 5 areas key to military family quality of life: childcare, education, healthcare, housing, and spouse employment. Mrs. Brown uses her platform to prioritize and address these challenges head on. Inspired by the special needs of her own son, she's passionate about advocating for improved military child education opportunities and special needs programs, to include the Exceptional Family Member Program, supporting school liaisons and local military educational organizations in her assisting services. Mrs. Brown serves as an ambassador to Easterseals DC, Maryland, Virginia, and we are thrilled to have this opportunity for her to share her wisdom and experience in the area of EFMP. Thank you so much for joining us, Mrs. Brown.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and that was a generous introduction. Thank you for that. And to our Partners in Promise team, along with Easterseals, for allowing me an opportunity to talk about a very important topic today, and to me, which is education. So education is one of my focus areas, and I'm especially aware of the unique challenges that our Exceptional Family Member Program, or EFMP, families face with regards to special education. As my family is also an EFMP family and has had to navigate the world of special education on behalf of my child, I do understand the challenges, emotions, struggles all of us encounter. It's useful to go back to the original purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to remember why we are here. It states, disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for our children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. Every child has a right to a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. I know there have been some unique challenges due to COVID. I know many families have been directly impacted by this new normal we live in. There have been gaps in both medical and educational services for many of our exceptional family members. Our new normal has made it challenging for our children to progress and learn at appropriate rates. Teachers are mentally exhausted, and many of them are really doing their best that they can under these circumstances, just like many of our families. I know one family with a young child with autism has not been able to attend school in several months. With the shift to virtual classes due to COVID, this child is unable to make the connection to a live person on the other side of the screen in the same way as his in-person instructor. Now, the burden is placed upon his formerly employed, but now stay-at-home parent to ensure his virtual attendance. She is simultaneously attending the school needs of the family's other 3 children. With limited resources and expertise provided, his IEP progress documentation reflects slow or no progress. Instead of providing increased resources, the IEP goals have been altered to fit the resources of the school or that district. I know of another family with a young child who wears a cochlear device, but also on lip reading, but where he wears cochlear implants so that he can hear. He relies not only on his cochlear device, but also lip reading for communication with his teachers and parents and his peers. This family is not necessarily opposed to mask requirements, but recognizes they have impacted the child's ability to learn. The family, in partnership with the child's teachers, must work harder to ensure the gaps are filled and to ensure their son receives a free, appropriate public education. This is true for many families, and I realize there are many more stories, some much more challenging than one I just described. Stifling progress can be barriers, real, perceived, and even those unknown, that parents face. This is why we need organizations and resources like Partners in Promise to come alongside families and equip them with the tools and knowledge to advocate for our children's rights to receive appropriate, free, and appropriate public education, and to teach families how to advocate, to recognize those obstacles, and to share those recommendations and supports so their child can achieve the best possible outcome. I know from personal experience how emotional and intimidating an individualized educational plan or IEP meeting can be. It can often feel as though it is me versus all of them, the experts who think they know my child needs more than I do. It took time, practice, and patience before I understood how to approach my child's education with tactics and strategy versus reactive emotion. I've had to learn how to win others over and build understanding and compassion towards my child and his needs. I've also learned the value of having another person present at an IEP meeting to be on my side and help advocate for what's best for my child, to take notes, or just to help me ask questions, to help me feel as though I'm not alone. I hope many in our audience are familiar with rights law training. If you're not sure, if you are aware, oh, I'm so sorry. I think I'm going into another avenue here. I would recommend, I'm not sure if you're aware that 18 months ago, the Air Force provided this training to our school liaisons, EFMP staff, and several of our attorneys to better support our families in special education. It is training I would recommend for every family who has a child with a 504 or an IB. I would also recommend families reach out to their school liaisons for support. In addition to the school liaisons at the local installations, Air Force and Space Force families can reach out to the EFMP Central Cell Special Education Specialists if they need additional help. COVID has certainly changed the way we do business now and has no doubt impacted the education of our children. The tips and tools Partners in Promise and other organizations provide families as they navigate this new normal are tremendous help to our families. I am grateful for the work you and your team do to support families, and I appreciate your inviting me here today to talk about this important subject. Thank you all, and now I'd like to turn the program over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown, for that amazing kickoff. You've summarized things so nicely for our families and resources. I, as Michelle mentioned earlier, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Partners in Promise and lead researcher. But before any further ado, we'll just jump right into the data. So in September and October of 2021, we fielded our annual survey. We had a wonderful response rate, hearing from over 1,100 families. The highest response rate came from our enlisted service members, followed by officers. We had a wonderful representative sampling from various branches of service with a higher than anticipated response rate from their Air Force families, which was factored into our data analysis. We heard from 24% active duty service members and 65% active duty spouses who also serve as educational caregivers. When we were looking into this survey, we really wanted to understand a few different areas, and these are our primary research questions for this survey. We wanted to understand the impact of the highly mobile military lifestyle and what impact it has on the ability for our children to receive a free and appropriate public education, namely dealing with timelines, receipt of services after a military move. We also wanted to understand how familiar our families were to the services and supports within special education and the military that are there to assist them. And lastly, we wanted to understand what about the military lifestyle, if anything, might prevent a family member from accessing recourse within the special education system, namely through filing of a due process complaint or informal complaints. When the data started to speak, it told us that there were three main areas that our families were facing when it came to barriers against receiving a free and appropriate public education. Those are the real, perceived, and unknown barriers, and we'll go into those now. So real barriers, timeline barriers, that was one of our major findings in this survey report. We wanted to understand, we wanted to remove the bias from the questions. So we asked our family members a few different questions in order to kind of create this timeline to understand what our families are facing. The first question that we asked was the age that their child was identified with a learning difference or a developmental difference. We then asked from that identification, how many months passed between that moment and the start of special education evaluations. This next question was, from that point, how many months passed between the start of an evaluation and an eligibility determination? And lastly, from eligibility determination to the receipt of services. And so in total, our average wait time for family members was roughly 23 months. It is important to note that we did factor COVID into this calculation. And when we removed the numbers where children might have received their diagnosis during the COVID environment, these numbers did not change significantly. So what we're seeing here is the average in total. As you can see, the average age of identification was 3.18, but let's deep dive a little bit more into that identification. So we wanted to understand, how different diagnoses or comorbid diagnoses come into play. Our primary cited diagnosis was autism spectrum disorder, followed by ADHD. One thing that really came out as a finding during this identification period was who first noticed these exceptional needs, and the relationship that who noticed had with the age that their child received special education services. And we noted that the medical professionals, when they were the first to identify an exceptional need, that child was more likely to receive services at a younger age as compared to someone who was identified by a teacher. Parents also were in this equation, but again, going back to the fact that the medical professionals were the first to identify. And why does this matter? Well, it's really wonderful insight into understanding how we can best support our parents in educating them, and our medical professionals and educational professionals who all want to help understand how we can look at these highly mobile children and support them and understand where they're coming from and how we can quickly come to early intervention. Alrighty, so as we go now from identification to the beginning of an evaluation, we're going to click into this finding here. So again, we wanted to understand in our research questions what might impact these delays. We already mentioned that who identified this exceptional need had a relationship with receiving services earlier. Additionally, the Exceptional Family Member Program, if families cited that they were enrolled in this program, their children were also receiving services at a younger age. Those who experienced higher than average moves, which for the respondents for this survey, the average number of moves was 4. Anyone who moved 5 or more times, on average, experienced the longest delays. Children with ADHD also experienced significantly more delays as well in receiving their identification and diagnosis. And so now we're going to look at the beginning of an evaluation to receiving an eligibility determination. And this is an important number, 204. And it's important because as we look into the next slide, it will become evident why 204 may be a significant delay. When we look at these timelines, it is important to note that there are a lot of timelines that are connected to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. From the start of a special education evaluation, according to IDEA, there is a window of approximately 60 days or earlier, depending upon the state, that a family, once that they give their consent, until that eligibility determination is given by the school district. Our families, 61%, reported that they waited longer than that 60-day timeline. While we can't know the exact details of how that played out in their experience, the data show that it is not unusual for this delay to happen, as the majority did experience the delay. Additionally, we asked our families not only about their delays during their initial evaluations, but we also asked about delays after military moves. And as you can see by this graphic, roughly 25% cited that they had what we call an IEP that Shireen mentioned before, the Individualized Education Program, or 504 plan. After a military move, roughly only 25% had those plans implemented upon arrival to a new location, adding in additional delays. And lastly, we talk about eligibility determination to receipt of services. So again, going back to the law, IDEA says that there is 30 days that a family has from that moment, from when they receive that eligibility determination, to have an IEP meeting with the school district. And from there, timelines vary. It can be that they don't necessarily agree, or it takes longer to have the meeting. But the complication for our military families is in the later part, Once that IEP is developed, schools are advised to begin and implementing that IEP as soon as possible. And as you can see from the total here, 171 days pass is the average wait time for our family members. So although we don't know where the delays are originating, we do know that these delays are systemic. Again, so when we look at delays and timelines, we want to understand how this happens, not just the initial diagnosis, but from initial diagnosis to after each individual move. The average number of months military families waited after their most recent military move was 5.75 months. When we compare that number to the percentages of families who cited being happy and satisfied with their school experiences, it only reduced that delay to 4.7 months, indicating that our families are expecting to receive a delay. And why this is significant: 5.75 months constitutes 1/4 of a military 2-year tour of duty. And we just talked about perception, so I am happy and thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Amy Schumann. Dr. Amy Schumann is a professor of folklore, narrative, and disability studies in the Department of English at the Ohio State University. She is the co-author of 2 books on narrative and co-author of 2 books on human rights, co-editor of a collection of essays on disability, and the author of many essays on disability. She serves as the co-principal investigator and co-recipient of 2 federal TPSID awards for a program called TOPS at the Ohio State University. She has also received funding for projects to promote job development and prevention of abuse for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Among other awards, she is a recipient of the American Folklore Society Lifetime Achievement Award and a Guggenheim Fellowship. Dr. Schumann, I'm going to kick it over to you to discuss some of our qualitative findings.
Thanks to everyone for being here today, and I hope that we'll get some comments from some of you about your personal experiences. So I was mostly involved in the qualitative analysis of our data, and I wanted to first say that the qualitative data helps us in 3 ways. First, it helps us to explain the information that Jennifer just presented. And you can see we have so many questions, so we then could turn to people and their experiences to understand them. Second, it really helped us to see where we might do some future research to learn more about about the experiences that some of you all have had. And third, it helps us to understand the assumptions that guide people's decision making. By the way, for the organizers, I'm not sure people can see me. I think you're still seeing Jennifer, so just wanted you to know. What we can do is look at the conversations on the ground. That's the conversations that you all have with each other, with other parents, with other people in the military, to share your experiences. And what we've learned is that people use those conversations on the ground to make really important decisions about whether or not to stay in the military, for example, or decisions about whether, if there is going to be a move, maybe one spouse should stay behind so that they don't experience this huge time lag. Oh, I'm glad you can see me. Good. So I wanted to just say a few things that we learned qualitatively about the remedies for some of the problems that Jennifer identified. Number one, that really might be overlooked, is that many of the parents said that they felt listened to just by being asked questions on the survey. That is, that the survey itself gave them a feeling that they had a voice. And one parent said, many said it in other words, I can't possibly be the only one going through this. And the survey let them know that, no, they're not. We did hear many comments about people making tough decisions about their own military careers. And I think that's especially important. How can we make changes in the resources that are available so that people perceive that that they have resources, that they aren't on their own, and therefore can do better in their military careers. Many parents said that they do experience the sense that they are the only ones advocating for their children. And if they don't do it, no one will. So one parent said, "He'll continue to fall behind if I don't keep fighting." And many parents expressed that sentiment. As we discovered in in every dimension of the survey, the parents don't feel uninformed. We know that the parents were uninformed. That is, they didn't necessarily know what resources were available to them, but they feel very informed about their own children. And as we try to address the problem of parents who aren't informed enough about EFMP or other resources available to them, we need to realize that they are informed about their children. One parent wrote and said, "I welcome any conversation that can positively impact the needs of EFMP families. I would love to serve as an advocate to help as many EFMP families as possible. I'm extremely passionate about the need to educate schools on the unique needs of EFMP families." So we need to also regard these families as resources. And then finally, I wanted to point out that solving the problem and therefore making the military more effective for these parents will help everyone. That is, it's a simple observation, but it really struck home when I looked at the qualitative data. The full participation of our children in their daily lives, in their future lives, as contributing members of society is related in really important ways to the full participation of the military parents. So it's a partnership. And the question I want to leave you with is, how do we make it feel more like a partnership to the parents? Back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Schuman, for those qualitative findings. We are thrilled that Ohio State University partnered with us on this survey. As we continue looking at perceived barriers, Dr. Schuman talked about what our families are feeling and what they believe to be true. And so when we look at special education, if our family members don't agree that the IEP plan or program and or the 504 plan is best serving their child, they have the ability to file a complaint. That is recourse within the system. However, we're thrilled to say that 20% of our families, only 20%, said that they had ever filed any complaint. However, of the remaining percentages, 74% cited that they had a reason to file a complaint, but didn't. And the primary reason that they cited for not filing a complaint was they didn't think that it would help. And that is an important perception, because our families are using these perceived experiences, whether true or not, to make that decision making that Dr. Schuman mentioned. They're using these perceptions in their decision making and not actually pursuing recourse, despite the fact that it is the primary method to receive a free and appropriate education if they do not agree with what is happening at the school district. Another perception that we're seeing is caregiving. This is a finding that was quite interesting. Our families don't believe they have a choice but to advocate for their children. And our numbers here reflect that. Of the 740 military spouse respondents, 64% of them were not active participants in the workforce, with the highest percentages, 33%, citing that they chose to not be in the workforce for educational caregiving reasons, and followed by medical caregiving reasons. So as we look at our barriers, we talked about the real timeline barriers, the perceived barriers, the lack of recourse, and lastly, we're going to talk about the unknown barriers. So our families, as we alluded to before, as Dr. Schuman alluded to, are very familiar with their own children and the needs of their children, but they are largely unfamiliar with the services and supports that are in place to help, both provided by the school districts and by the military through various compacts and just ideas within parental consent. So we asked questions related to this. We asked how familiar were they with concepts like extended school year or the Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission. We wanted to understand how familiarity with these topics impacted their child's outcomes. So we categorized those who were very familiar or somewhat familiar as informed, and those who were not at all familiar or not familiar as uninformed. And as you can see, one example that we cited here was the least restrictive environment. Our families who were informed were more likely to have their child placed in a least restrictive environment alongside their general education peers than those who were uninformed. But there were other positive outcomes that came with this information. And of course, there are solutions to this in the lack of information and lack of awareness, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But first, I would love to take the time to introduce one of our guest speakers, Katie Neese. She is the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, where she serves as an advisor to the U.S. Secretaries of Education on matters related to education of children and youth with disabilities, as well as employment and community living for youth and adults with disabilities. The mission of her office is to improve early childhood educational and employment outcomes and to raise expectations for all people with disabilities, their families, their communities, and the nation. Neese previously served as Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at the American Physical Therapy Association. Prior to joining APTA, Neese spent 23 years at Easterseals. Her roles at Easterseals included service on the senior management team, federal and state government relations advocacy, oversight of federal grants and contracts, and management of the Easterseals Office of Public Affairs. Prior to Easterseals, Neese was the Associate Director of the American Association of University-Affiliated Programs for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. She also was legislative staff to Chairman Senator Tom Harkin of the Senate Subcommittee on Disability Policy between 1987 and 1991, where she worked on all disability legislation, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I'm going to turn that over to you, Katie, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And if we could go to the next slide. So I'm with the Office of Special Education, and Rehabilitative Services, and we oversee two primary federal programs. One, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that empowers families to access a free, appropriate public education for their eligible students with disabilities, as well as the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which oversees the vocational rehabilitation program that helps adults with disabilities get and keep good jobs. We are charged with monitoring states' implementation of both of these laws. And we can go to the next slide, but I wanted to reinforce a couple of things with you all today. First, I'm grateful for Partners in Promise for doing this survey. It frustrates me to no end. IDEA was first established in 1975. That was 47 years ago, right? This is nothing new. And it is so frustrating, but it's something that I certainly have heard over the course of my career, especially when it comes to military service families, that depending on where they are, the local school district will just kind of wait for them to, if their 2 years of service are over, the school district kind of waits for them to leave and doesn't bother it. And school districts get frustrated when I've said that in the past, and your survey just reinforces that, unfortunately, in too many instances, that's exactly what happens. So I wanted to highlight some resources that we have at the U.S. Department of Education that I hope can be helpful to you. I wanted to comment on the fact that most parents are not filing a complaint. My experience is many military families are play by the rules folks, right? They they do what they're expected and told to do, and rocking the boat is not something that they want to do. Let me please encourage, implore, beg you to file a complaint. We can monitor states if there are new complaints, an increase from one year over another. We are just doing some targeted monitoring in a state because there was a dramatic increase in the requests for due process hearings. So please, please, please file a complaint with your state if you are not getting what you need. It helps us do our job so we can make sure the state is monitoring the local school districts and doing their job. There are tools that are part of the law, but the tools won't work unless we use them. Second of all, I wanted to highlight a technical assistance system that's available to you through the Parent Training and Information Centers. And I've got the link on the slide. There are parent training and information centers in every state. They are staffed by parents of kids with disabilities who've been through what you're going through and can help you navigate an IEP meeting, can help be an advocate with you in an IEP meeting. I think Mrs. Brown said that she often brings an advocate. I have been an advocate in many IEP meetings, and it absolutely blows my mind how it changes the dynamic of the meeting when the parent brings an ally. I've also made people start at the beginning of an IEP meeting to begin the conversation by identifying a strength that the child has. So it isn't just the family that's identifying a strength, but everybody around the table does. And that changes the dynamic. So instead of talking about what a child is not yet able to do, it's talking about what the child can do now and how we build on that asset and that strength going forward. It's a much better conversation to have. The second resource I wanted to identify for you was we have just a boatload of information, basic information about IDEA. So it's everything from what the timelines are to what the due process protections have, to what rights you need to be informed that you have, about how to file a complaint. It's best to file a complaint with your state Department of Education. And that's how the ball will get rolling. States are also required to provide mediation. So you don't always have to get a lawyer to do this. There are no cost opportunities available to you. And I would encourage you to take advantage of those. The third element I have here is the department issued some guidance last fall as part of our return to school roadmap. One of them is a long question and answer piece on the individualized education plan. And the reality is that we know that many states and districts were backlogged because of the pandemic, and that was changing timelines. States are still required to ensure that districts meet those timelines. Just because they're hard and they're having difficulty to do it doesn't change the basic requirements of the law. So there's some great tips in that document as well. And then the last thing is again, if you are considering wanting to exploring a due process complaint, here there's another document that sort of lays out all the things that you need to know. I would just encourage you, and what Secretary Cardona says over and over again, and what our marching orders at the department are, is we want kids in person, safe and learning, right? That we want every child to have the educational supports that he or she needs to be able to be in school, safe and learning. And we know that the learning loss for children with disabilities has been dramatic. We also know that the relationship loss that goes with that learning loss is dramatic. And we're seeing just incredible mental health challenges, not only for students, but for teachers and principals and other adults in the schools. And so the sooner we can get back to sort of regular order, if you would, the better it will be. But please know that my office is absolutely on your side and trying every day to get states to make sure that districts are doing what they need to do. The secretary often says, and we totally agree, that the pandemic didn't change kids' rights to an education. The pandemic did not change kids' rights to an education. And so if someone says it's too hard or they can't do this and they don't find the staff, I accept those things as being true, but it doesn't change the fact that your rights, that your child's rights to a free, appropriate public education were in place before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. And we want to make sure that your children are getting the services and supports that they need, to which they are entitled under the law, and that your service to this country is somehow not taken for granted to the risk of your child's education. So I hope these resources can be helpful to you. Again, if I can do anything to be supportive of you, I'm happy to do that. Again, please consider filing complaints if things are not going right. That helps us take action. So I will turn it back to you, Jennifer, and I'm happy to engage later on in the session.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to pass it over to our Executive Director, Michelle Norman, to kick off our recommendations so we can wrap up the data with some solutions.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And wow, thank you, Katie, for all those insights and just highlighting the Department of Education's strong support for military connected children in special education. You shared so many tremendous resources. And I think what you also added today was you demystified those recourses that are available to our families. So thank you so much. We look forward to working with you guys on all those initiatives. There has been a lot of focus today on the challenges our exceptional military families face. However, our goal is, again, to make top level change. And so before we can look ahead, let's learn about what we've been doing now. Past DoD strategies have mainly focused on educating the educator through wonderful programs like the Purple Star School Program, offering online learning through Military One Source, EFMP, and me, or even pointing families to what Katie mentioned, the parent training and information centers that are located in each state. All of these support systems are valuable tools in our toolbox. But however, the data show that we can do more. The framework of the special education system really places parents in that driver's seat, asking them to navigate this complexity of state and federal law, in addition to navigating this military lifestyle. It is a difficult mission. And what makes this even more difficult is the underfunding of IDEA and the current shortage of special education teachers. So based on our survey data, we feel there are several recommendations that will open the doorway to access FAPE. These ideas center on proactively educating parents, providing them easy access to information to inform their decision-making, and strengthening the supports that already exist. So number one, we need to make information more accessible. And when we do standardize EFMP processes and systems across the service branches, there is less stress and confusion among EFMP families who are trying to navigate them all. Our data show that families get their information from a variety of sources. We need to pivot on our outreach methods to ensure families are informed. The Air Force's dedicated EFMP Facebook page and the Navy's new EFMP app are just two examples of that proactive outreach. Another way to support families and make information accessible is to create a centralized resource dashboard with existing student outcome data by state for both military connected students in general education and for those with disabilities in special education. This data already exists and is reported annually through two laws, the Every Student Succeeds Act and through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. However, that data is not easily accessible. Taking the state-specific information and providing access to it in a central location like Military One Source would help all military families make timely and informed decisions for their next PCS. Website links would be included that would point families back to the source data so they can do further research. It is a win-win for all military families, not just those in special education. Now, one fantastic benefit of the MIC3 Compact is advanced enrollment, as Jen had talked earlier about, which is now available in 33 states with the possibility to be expanded to more than almost close to 50 states by the end of this year. However, as Jennifer mentioned, 73% of our respondents said they were not familiar with MIC3 and its benefits, and only 16% of our survey respondents were ever able to advance enroll their child. The time is right to strengthen the MIC3 and its protections. An assessment of the MIC3 led by DoD in partnership with the state defense liaison offices would help identify barriers to advance enrollment and ultimately help shorten those delays after a PCS for children in special education. It is through that data collection that we can track who's using it or attempting to use this benefit and how do we improve it. And we want to develop recommendations that promote awareness as well as ensure consistency of these benefits that the MIC3 offers. The third recommendation is expanding the existing DoD advisory panel on community support for military families with special needs. Military families want to be heard and collaborate with those who are making decisions that impact them. So including those stakeholders such as Defense Health Agency, DODEA, and others that coordinate with the EFMP program is important. Additionally, the data show there's a need for transparency of the advisory panel's operations that are designed to help them. With public meeting and reporting requirements and expanding the panel to include key stakeholders, these improvements will allow for families to voice their concerns directly to the Office of Special Needs, as well as help combat the loss of confidence that was expressed in our survey data. And last, as we mentioned earlier, we need to proactively educate military families because the data shows that families are not feeling supported and have allowed for past experiences to impact their future actions. We combat this by educating families about special education law and concepts, but we also need to educate those who directly support our families to include the school liaison officers, EFMP coordinators, or system navigators, or case liaisons, depending on which service branch, and other key DoD officials. It is impossible for this monumental task to fall solely on DoD's shoulders. We need allies, partners, those in the private nonprofit space to partner together to fill in those gaps, leveraging and expediting public-private partnerships through memorandums of understandings and also resource sharing like surveys will not only benefit the entire community, but will also ensure that all stakeholders have the most current pulse of the EFMP community. And it takes a village to know what that pulse is in our EFMP community. It is a pleasure to introduce Brooke Kaiser, Senior Director of Respite Services with Easterseals DC, Maryland, Virginia, about the services that they offer and other resources available in our civilian community. Thank you for joining us, Brooke.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. So first off, I am a wife of a Marine veteran and who is now a first responder and activated in the National Guard. So I come from the military world, as we could say. And first, I have to 100% agree with everything that has been said here. As a mother, I am dealing with some of the same challenges with our daughter, and we're kind of in the first stages. And I'm lucky enough to live in an area where I know the county and the system, but even with the knowledge I have on IEPs and 504 plans, we had to reach out to an advocate to help us. And so it feels like a part-time job or even a full-time job, and that's because it is. We have to be advocates for our children. And as parents, we know what's best for them. And so I send you all hugs because it is not an easy thing to do, and it can be very frustrating. And it's so complex, and especially if you're PCSing to, a new school system, so many factors play into that part. And you're kind of starting from square one again when you PCS. And it's overwhelming enough, especially if the service member is deployed and you kind of got to do this alone. And as you all know, you could have an IEP with 15 goals, but then you move to a new state and all of a sudden your IEP now has 5 goals, which doesn't make sense. And so a lot of times you almost go into these meetings and you want to say what needs to be done, but you almost have to have the individuals in the meeting from the school system think that they're coming up with those ideas. And, that's the sad truth. So you kind of gear them into thinking that way. And it is such a shame that we have to fight so hard to get our children the supports that are so needed. And as many of us have witnessed, if your child doesn't have those supports, early intervention, they start dreading going to school. You see more behaviors, you see bullying, and there are so many other impacts that affect our children with not getting these critical supports. And if schools are going to put these demands on children for what they need to know, then they should be providing these supports and helping us, because a child can't succeed without interventions in the classroom. And that's something that I feel very strongly about. And so it's tough, but I think we have a wonderful panel here. Some great information has been given that I really think that we can take and go further with. And so from that side, I just want to say, I understand what everyone's going through. I was shocked from our personal experience, but I have learned that advocating is the best thing that you can do, and really keeping in touch with everybody that's involved with your 504 or IEP teams to keep that line of communication open, I think is really key, but it's not easy. So I will say that. So I have been with Easterseals for 15 years, and part of the two programs that we offer is we do offer a in-center program, which is one Saturday a month, which is unfortunately due on hold due to COVID, but that is for children with special needs in our military community and also includes their siblings. It is also for veterans, wounded warriors, civilian families, and now first responders. Within that, we also open that up to the community who may not have children with special needs. And that's really to provide the parents with that much needed break. It also allows children with special needs and their siblings to meet other children who are in the same boat as they are. What's great is each child is matched one-on-one with a volunteer for the day, and every month we offer different themes. And this has been a huge impact on our caregivers to give them that much needed break, and also gets the children out of the house, whether they need to take that much needed nap or they need to restore, they need to go to the grocery store, they have the ability to do that. And so I think respite services is one of those services that unfortunately is least funded, but it's one that's a necessity. Everyone knows that you can't be the best parent if you're overwhelmed and you're burnt out. You can't do what you need to do for your children. So respite isn't nice. It is definitely necessary. With that being said, we also help administer the Navy Exceptional Family Member Program, EFMP program. We have been doing this in partnership with Child Care Aware of America for the National Capital Region for the past 13 years. Eligible active duty Navy families are able to receive 40 hours a month of respite care in their home. And so if anybody is interested in that, we could direct you to Child Care Aware of America. It is an amazing program. All of the respite care providers that go into our families' homes have a long list of a vetting process they have to go through. They are all very carefully screened. They are interviewed, and they're really tailored to the individual needs of each family, and that is across the United States. It has been valuable. As we know, if a service member is worried about their family, worried about the stressors of what's going on at home, what's going on in the school system, their spouse isn't getting a break, they're not getting a break, they're not mission ready. They're not able to 100% focus on their job. And that's a concerning thought. So by having respite care, you are allowing those caregivers, that service member, to focus on what they need to focus on, give them that much needed break. If a spouse is deployed, they know that while they're gone, their family has those extra supports of 40 hours of respite care in the house. And I also want to mention that many times spouses can be exceptional family member programs. They may be suffering from anxiety, depression, their own health issues, cancer. And this is another program that can really support the spouses. And I really feel that within this program, from surveys done, we have seen a better retention within the military, less divorce and things of that nature. Oh, I think it was posted. So, I really hope that these resources can help. I know every state has different forms of respite. I do want to say that the Navy EFMP program is through the Child and Youth Program, and it is different than the EFMP or TRICARE ECHO. So it is run separately. So that is one thing I want to know. And another thing I just want to stress is that, each of our children are individuals, and something that has always gotten to me is when they compare my child to another child, because I'm looking at my child at what she can do at her levels. And we each have our own goals and our own strengths. And I think that's something to remember, to never compare your child to somebody else. Because, well, let's say my child can't read right now. She may have a friend who is struggling in other areas. And so I think that's important to remember as parents. I think so often it's hard to say, well, this kid is doing this, or this child at this age is doing this, but yet my child is here and not doing this. And I think we reach for each individual goal that our child can succeed at. And I think that's an important key point to always remember when we're talking about our children. So I hope this is helpful for everyone. And I thank you all for being here and with all your amazing resources, because I learned so much throughout these surveys, and it really hits home for what all of our military families are going through.
Thank you so much, Brooke, for sharing those important resources for exceptional military families. You didn't mention this, but my own family benefited from the respite care program while we were stationed at the Pentagon in DC over a decade ago. So we know how important it is to ensure that the whole family is taken care of. It's bridging that military civilian divide that ensures military families have those access to this critical support, such as respite care. So thank you so much for what you guys do at Easterseals. And so now, with just a few minutes left, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar. In addition to the amazing panelists and speakers you've already heard from today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Mrs. Karen Terry. She is a program analyst with the Office of Special Needs. The Office of Special Needs is responsible for DoD-level policies and programs to assist military families with members who have special educational or medical needs. And they work closely with the service branch EFMP offices to ensure that the processes involved are standardized and meets the needs of the families. So thank you for joining us today, Karen. And I think we will start off with our first question from the chat. Let's see. And thank you so much. We're getting quite a few in the Q&A. The first one I would love to start off with, and hope that maybe some folks have some thoughts on it. How can we duplicate the training the Air Force has provided to EFMP and school liaison officers for other branches? What is the best avenue for families and also our professionals who help families to access this training? So does anyone have any thoughts or might want to speak about the training that the Air Force has and how that can be standardized, I guess, across all the service branches?
Hi, Michelle.
Sorry.
Can I jump in there for a real quick second? This is Shireen Brown. So let me just say that one of the methods to get across to different services, I've learned this over the course of the Air Force, just how to get information. First of all, just getting feedback from the different participants, from our family members, to be able to bring this to light. Second of all, trying to provide any sort of documentation that you can to the different services, working through your own resources to be able to say, when you have a collective voice, to be able to address certain topics that you've seen in other places, bringing more members to that table to share their interest for that particular topic, and then having those agencies document as much as possible the interest and need for those particular services is a way forward. Oftentimes, there's a little bit of a competitive friendliness, a friendly competition, if you want to call it that, between the services to be able to provide different pieces of information, whether it's good or services. And so as we go forward, believe me, there's going to be data analytics with the programs that have been brought forth. So we need to hear your feedback with regards to how well the program is going, or maybe even not going. And so when we can get that information, just as Partners in Promises provided this survey and provided the data that's available, that can change how different services address the services and products that are being offered. So this is strongly recommended. We've been talking about this for a while now. Nothing moves fast within the government, as you probably well know. It is highly bureaucratic and whatnot, but trying to get the data moved to different persons to be able to hear, or at least agencies, is a good way to move forward. I think you had the Miss Terry, Miss Terry that was on the line, I guess. She's a great person in the office that she's in, because she's over the DoD, and that's all of our services together. So thank you for having her on, but trying to get more information to the various services is helpful. So I hope that helps just a little bit. Thanks so much.
I'd
Thank
just like to
you.
add a little bit, if that's okay. I'm sorry. A little bit about the resources. I think the question was about the rights law resource that the Air Force had, the training the Air Force had participated in. And I would just like to let you all know that the military services in general have taken legal services and getting training specific to special education law very seriously, especially over the last few years. And all the services have been given some additional training specific to special education law. And I've seen some chatter in the chat group about it. There's some really great things that I'm very excited about happening in our legal services. Lots of great training, lots of information. So I really want to encourage a family who is concerned about their special education, what's happening in the IEP, a delay, all those kind of things that we've talked about today. I would really encourage them to go to their installation legal office and ask, because if the training is not there or they don't have the expertise to handle that complexity of that particular situation, there are pro bono lawyers available through the Bar Association, the American Bar Association, who will help with this. So they can refer you to those people if they know that there's a need. So a lot of what we're talking about today, and I know it's been mentioned, but a lot of what we're talking about today is letting people know what your needs are, because there are so many services and resources that are available to help you. We want to help you. We want you to be successful. I'm a parent of a special needs child. My son has had an IEP his entire career in school. Another son has had a 504 his entire time in school. I'm well acquainted with the struggle and the information that you just, when you don't feel you have it, how difficult and frustrating, and all the emotions that go with that. And I really, really do want to assure people that OSA and in general, we want to alleviate that from your worry list as much as possible. So we do appreciate your feedback. We appreciate this survey because it really gives us some things to think about, particularly with the recommendations. We appreciate all the information we get back through the services, but you have to, we really do need you to let us know what you need. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen, so much. I really appreciate your perspective. And you're right, there are a lot of resources now available through each service branch. And having, you know, those folks who have that expertise to help these families navigate the system is something that was well needed. And I'm just happy to see that going forward. So we really appreciate that. So again, I know in the interest of time, we're already at 2:03. So I want to thank everyone today for attending our session. We had an amazing dialogue, and please know that our webinar team will answer all the questions in the chat and the Q&A that we did not get to in the last hour or so. And I wanted to extend a special thank you to our wonderful panelists for their advocacy, their insights and resources that they shared, but also their commitment to remove those barriers that are in place for exceptional military families to receive a free, appropriate public education. And why does this matter? You know, we want all military children to be able to learn so they can become independent, productive members of society, just like their civilian peers. So together we are stronger, and today's webinar shows it will take allies, partners, and those in our local communities who give their all for this great nation. And to the military families attending, thank you for sharing your stories and being part of the solution with us. We're optimistic about the important work ahead to improve military special education. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
We should be okay to stay online until about 2:15, but I do see that for the most part, our participants are leaving. However, if you want to continue the conversation for another 5 or 10 minutes, I think we have the space and time to do that.
We can certainly ask a couple more questions to the group. Let's see. If there is
Michelle,
one that,
sorry, I saw one asking about, it was an anonymous attendee asking about homeschooling. I would love to, if someone has a question about homeschooling and special education, I know that all the panelists here, if you still have that question, what would you like, what type of supports are you needing? How can we look into this information through our surveys? We need, just like Karen and everyone had mentioned, we need to hear from you to understand how we can support you. So feel free to drop that anonymously again in here if you want to address that. Otherwise, I'll mute myself and give it back to Michelle, but please let us know.
I think there's a difference between children whose parents choose to homeschool them versus parents who work with the school district to homeschool them, because they're one sort of a parental placement to a private school, which is home. And in those instances, parents don't have their rights to public education. So one of the things that I would just encourage folks to reinforce is, if parents choose to do that, there are consequences of that decision that may make it more difficult for them to access the services that they need. But I also understand that some parents just get totally frustrated and give up and do that.
thank you so much, Katie. Let's take a look and see if there's any other questions that we can try to get. Let's see, there's one in the chat. Who is the best to send the complaint to if our state Department of Education is not following through with corrective actions, or if there's issues with a 504 plan?
Okay, so
okay.
on a 504 plan, a parent can file a complaint directly with the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education, and that process is on the department's website. Again, if a state isn't following up on a complaint, there are also protection and advocacy agencies in every state. There's sort of legal services for people with disabilities who I would encourage folks to reach out to as well.
Thank you, Katie, for that. We're putting you on the spot on a lot of these.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, there was another one. Are there any other people or places we can contact other than EFMP to ensure we actually get the help we need? Would anyone like to comment on that one?
I would just reinforce the parent training and information centers that are funded by the Department of Education. And again, they are in every state. And these are parents who've run the traps before with their own kids and are well-schooled at trying to help new parents new to the system have a successful outcome.
And I'd like to piggyback on that. That is a common referral from EFMP because they do have that information for that state, specific to that state, and they do some great training on IDEA services. And oftentimes, I know in Virginia where I'm at, there is a person that is on their staff that is a military spouse who is providing training directly to military family members, because there is a different, kind of shade to everything when you factor in the military and the moves and those special concerns. So you can find that oftentimes as well. So yeah, they're a great resource.
Yeah, I'm going to summarize some of the questions, if that's okay, Michelle, because there's, I was raising my hand before to respond to Partners in Promise. We act as liaisons between, a lot of these agencies, the military, the family, the government support systems, and the schools. So we are happy to help, receive that information as well. But some of the questions that we're seeing here essentially boil down to, if something isn't working at the base level, branch level, how do they elevate that within, when they're told the chain of command is the right way to go, what happens if that's not received? Is there any avenues that you are recommended to pursue, just to boil up some of those questions?
For educational concerns, I guess I'm a little confused. Are they elevating through the military chain of command?
So some of the questions in here, we're talking about how, where is it? Are there resources? What is the best avenues for families to pursue accessing training? They all want to know how to access this information. I'm trying to summarize the chat here, but I was looking at multiple. So they were asking both about medical and education. So if it's medical or educational concerns they bring it to the EFMP coordinator, or they bring it to the school, who should they be reaching out to? If, for example, would it be their base commanding officer? Would they reach out if EFMP coordinator isn't able to provide that service for them? Where along the chain of command can we elevate these concerns?
I would say for educational concerns, you want to be elevating them through the DOE, through the civilian public school chain of command, if through the director of special education, and maybe into the school board. I believe every school board has a kind of a subcommittee for special education. I know we call it a Special Education Advisory Council that meets. And that was a great resource when I was first trying to figure out what was going on with my son and how it all worked and who the players were and what it all meant to me. It was a great resource. I just went and sat on those meetings and listened to the conversation. And it's also a place to, if you have a concern about how special education is happening in your school district, to elevate that concern directly to the school board. So that's one place. If it's a concern with medical, EFMP family support providers can help you, can give you the information resources you need to connect you to the right people. But we don't have medical experience. We're not TRICARE. So it may be that we refer you to people outside of the EFMP community for that assistance. I would like to touch on, if you have a TRICARE issue that's getting kind of out of hand and you feel like you've really run in circles trying to figure out who can help you. We do have a specialist, TRICARE specialist on staff at OSN, and that person can be contacted and she can help you kind of unravel that kind of ball of yarn that gets tangled up. She can help you with that. My dogs. It's the joy of working from home, right?
I agree with what you're saying. It's fabulous.
She's been quiet all this whole time, and now I'm talking. She's like, so yeah, you can elevate it within the structure, that's already in place. If you really don't feel like you're getting your questions answered or the help you need, go to the director of your military family support center. Go to the base commander. I wouldn't be shy about it. I mean, we can't do what we don't know. If we don't know how to help you or what you're needing, we can't help. I guess is the bottom line.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Can I jump in there for a real quick second, at least from the Air Force point of view? We have what's called the Community Action Team and a Community Action Board at every base location. And so that's an opportunity. The Community Action Team, or the CAT, meets quarterly, usually at base locations, where the Community Action Board may meet like every 6 months or so. So that if you can get to the Community Action Team as a military spouse or dependent, or at least talking through your school liaison about the challenges that you're facing overall. Maybe that might not be able to address the situation at hand that you're trying to alleviate with the educational system, but also bringing it to the chain of command, so to speak. That's an opportunity for them to discuss some of these issues. And the more they hear that this is a recurring topic, this is a way to elevate it through the chain of command. Because oftentimes in some locations, you'll have the wing leadership will interact with the superintendent at that location, or maybe even the school system, because there is a connection between the military leadership at that base location and the school district. And so then when more issues are being heard, there's an opportunity for the base leadership to be able to engage from a community perspective as to how to be able to resolve some of the issues, because maybe some of the things that are happening at the base may be similar instances that may be happening in the community, and how to be able to resolve those issues might be beneficial to the whole community and not just the military community. So if you keep in mind the community action team and the community action board, it's another way to share your thoughts and ideas, or at least bring to the wing leadership your concerns and your challenges that you're facing in your area. Just a thought to keep in mind. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I wanted to add one last thing before we close. The data show that, you are not alone in this, and that sometimes you might be feeling like a squeaky wheel, but this data shows that you are not a squeaky wheel. You are one of many people who are experiencing what you're experiencing. So, reaching out to your leadership who care and want to see your situation resolved is, why this data was collected at all. On behalf of Partners in Promise and our research team, I want to thank Easterseals for hosting this awesome event. Michelle, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I think you touched on it, Jennifer. You're not alone, and this data shows that we have a ways to go, but there are so many people who care deeply about our families and want to do the right thing. And we're just happy to work alongside them to make it better for them through this journey. So thank everybody for coming. Again, Easterseals, this was a fantastic venue. And we look forward to doing this maybe again in 1 year.
Thank you all again. Great appreciation to the panelists and the participants for joining us. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody.